we're going to talk about this is our website, ASC's website, which is kind of if you ever want to check it out and see kind of what we've done, what kind of work, it'll give you an idea. So we'll go to our design page, and majority of the stuff you'll see, there's a lot of keyframes, there's some environments, but there's a lot of characters, which is various characters from various projects, and there's a different method of designing characters. And I'm going to talk about that before we jump into the designing. Is like, what is the method? So there's my idea when moving forward with a design is how do we approach this? Do we go 2D with the design, or do we go 3D? Certain designs are based on just 3D. So it's so let's start with the 2D. And why do we choose 2D to design with? So this is the demon from Insidious, which is designed for the film Insidious, and it was going to be something so simple as we did a bunch of different designs, but a lot of them were just all 2D. But James Wan, the director, really wanted it to be this performer that basically he wanted it to be as simple as possible for the most part, just white and black, or red and black. Red and black is kind of his colors. He really likes to use that. So he wanted it really stark. He wanted this kind of red, splotchy aspect to the face, and the rest of the body is this almost shiny, shiny black. And this weird baldness with this weird hair on the side. It's just, he wanted it just to be creepy as possible and weird. So why we approach this 2D opposed to why wouldn't we start this in ZBrush? Well, ultimately it'd be a waste of time. So we knew who the actor was. We knew that we had pictures of him. We actually took pictures of him and started doing designs on top of them. So it makes sense to design in that format. So those are typical jobs where it is a character, a person, it's an actor, that you're actually having to work on top of. This was an early design for one of the Spider-Man movies for the Lizard, and early phase where we would see a bit more of the actor in it, which would be more prosthetic with some digital augmentation. Again, it's a likeness for the most part, so this could be done in 3D, but since the idea that it wanted to have a likeness, we didn't have the luxury of his live cast or scan, so using photographs. This is early design for Narnia, and this is for a practical house, K&B. They were going to build this as a practical creature. There was going to be, as there's various characters in this film, but this particular one was, at the time, it was easier for me, especially with a lot of hair. If there's a lot of hair, there's mechanics, robots, all that stuff. Well, I'm sorry. The robots are easier in 3D, but more hair-based stuff, it's easier to do in 2D just because of the nature of all the intricate details. There is some great hair tools out there. Maya has some great stuff. ZBrush has some interesting tools as well. But when it comes to painting hair, might as well just use photos or paint it. So that's why I go 2D. This is just some creepy character that was going to be a prosthetic. So again, if it's prosthetics, it's not going to be digital. Same here with maybe some digital augmentation for the eyes. Same here. These are just artwork. This is a werewolf for a film when I was at Stan Winston's, but this is all prosthetics on an actor with some digital augmentation to spread the eyes out. And so those are 2D, the reason that you would go 2D. So 3D really lends itself to more, these obscure shapes, when you're dealing with shapes that are that's not going to be a guy in a suit. There's just no way. So it's, instead of trying to take photographs and manipulate them, it's quicker to do it 3D. Like AI, when talking about this, the translucency of all this, seeing through something that has a ton of translucence, lots of layers. A lot of that's going to be easier in 3D because you can just render them out layers and then photo bash them together. Aliens, that again, it's something that's not, or this could be a puppet, but Stranger Things. There was a practical version of this created, but it was designed in 3D because of, again, it was early days of designing to figure out what is the process going to be for the film, the show, and the description lend itself towards something that doesn't feel like a guy in a suit. So that's just pushing that envelope as far as we could. So we just went 3D with it. War of the Worlds, something that's so obscure like this, there's just no way that you're going to make that as a puppet or even a. I mean, I guess you could do it as a puppet, but you're not. It's not going to be a guy in a suit. Ninja Turtles. These were all going to be digital, so we created them as digital designs. The Incredible Hulk, knowing it's not going to be a prosthetic, and it was going to be in rhythm and hues. Ended up doing the visual effects, so it was coming, with a design and an asset that was going to be working well with them. Ready Player One, that was all a virtual world for that whole movie, and so coming up with characters that you knew had to fit within that universe of characters that were virtual, but had to have a lot of personality. And that's part of when you're designing. You really want to see the character, the personality, and no matter what you're doing, so that it really helps convey the design and doesn't feel too sterile. And here's some other Ready Player One characters. Again, these are made 3D because of the purpose of they were going to be virtual anyway, and the proportions are very odd and hard for a guy in a suit. And this is also a good illustration for things that are mechanical, are easier to do in 3D and a bit harder to do in 2D. You can, but you have a lot more flexibility. What's great about 3D is that you can use it as an asset at moving forward. And then we have a robot from Lost in Space. That was going to be a guy in a suit for the most part, but there was also a lot of digital components when he's jumping around and stuff. But this is when he's more in his threatening pose, which is all digital. So it's so those are some ideas as far as like why you choose 2D over 3D, and there's it's up to each individual. This is why I choose it. So we're going to actually start designing, and let's get to start in the 2D realm and start in a character. So let's get going on that. All right, when starting 2D photo bashing techniques, I always have a really good amount of reference. These are different folders. This one's all animals for the most part. I'll cut and splice pieces if needed. This is backgrounds if I want to put splice a character into a background. Some neutral just backgrounds and ones that are more landscape based. But it's ones I've collected and I'll use over time, so I put them in individual folders. This particular one folder is just more like miscellaneous, like effects based stuff. Just weird, bizarre stuff, lightning, plasma. And then I have a folder that is just images, and these are ones of stills that I have taken, and also these are also from Shutterstock, which is the most of the images we saw in the other folders, which is always good to use for copyright purposes. These are some of the photographs of various people I have taken shots with costumes on that I'll use for various characters moving forward. And then we go into, let's see, textures. So textures are basically, for the most part, I'll use this for the 3D section. And then we have kind of some selects that I put together for, one of the concepts that I'll be working on. I think we're going to be working with this guy here. He's kind of moody. I just want to kind of make him into some kind of a beast, some kind of a creature. And most of the stuff, when you're finding images or you take a picture, is trying to find something that evokes an emotion as well as a mood. And this particular image is great because of the nice rim light it has, the core shadow, and the key light on the right. And it's kind of a neutral expression, so I'm not going to have to fight that as far as what I'm going to achieve. If I wanted him roaring, of course, or screaming, I would go using something different. So now I'm in Liquify. In Liquify, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the shape of his face. And here this is like these kind of cool little tools that come with Liquify, which is like if you have a face, for the most part, it automatically finds where the mouth is, where the nose is, the eyes, and you have these little sliders that you can mess around with and kind of manipulate. Sometimes they're good to get you kind of started. If there's, like sometimes separating the eyes, because a lot of what we're going to be doing is making this character into some kind of mutated animal creature. Like he's almost basically was some weird science experiment that went wrong, and also kind of make him kind of a hard ass character too. Where he's got like a probably end up putting scars and all kinds of stuff. So what I'm doing here is I'm just liquefying and actually making his face look a bit droopy, adding a lot of asymmetry to it, just so that I can allow for this to look like he's, not so perfect, not so symmetrical. And now I want to put some like weird deformity aspects. So this is like this hairless rat is actually a good place to start, as there's a lot of great things like the wrinkles, some of the weird skin disorder that's going on. So what I'm doing is I'm just selecting and cutting out the background so that it's going to be easy to just kind of either use as an overlay or soft light on top once I manipulate the face closer to the proportions that I want to get it in. So I may use part of the eyes, try to line up. And usually when I'm finding photographs, I end up selecting an area of the face that I want to use. Like the eyes are a good place to kind of just start manipulating and getting into the same location as the character underneath. Even if I don't use it, it's like at least it's a place where I can start seeing things line up. So here I'm just pushing and pulling some of the rat flesh around so I can kind of get these weird wrinkles or deformities that's happening. So I select that. I'm just going to kind of desaturate. And sorry, if it's going a little fast. There's a lot to do here, so I'll talk my way through. So I'm cutting and splicing pieces of the rat, like the ear, and I'm going to erase the rest because it's not really useful. I kind of want this possible ear I might use, or I may, decide not to. So what I've done here is basically lined up the face of the rat, and there's some interesting like wrinkles on the face and the neck, so he looks like he's a little bit messed up and deformed. So this character, what I'm thinking, and say it's a job that came along and it was basically to make a character that's going to be a prosthetic, a makeup that is going to be on an actor, and they want it to look like a mutated either rat or some kind of a beast. And he's kind of, reading the script, you would get a lot of these characteristics and talk to the director. You would find out like, okay, is this character, is he shy? Is he, is he a warrior? What is his personality? So with this, I'm going through to make him feel more like a warrior for the most part. Saying that that's the character we found. So what I'm looking for now is just other images. This is just stuff I found and put together, like of deformities, to help kind of this weird experiment, almost like if you are familiar with Island of Dr. Moreau. It's a credible story basically about this doctor on this island that basically mutates, and he's done it in different ways and different methods based on the stories and the movies that's been made in the past. Some have been, cutting and splicing animals together into humans to make them different. Some more other experimental aspects. What I've done here, before I go back into the details of that show, is I've decided that I'm going to use more of a cat's ear for this, because I'm starting to decide that this mutated character is going to have more cat influence than rat. And hairless cats, hairless animals are great just for reference, as far as finding a really good reference that you can use, or skin texture, because then you're not fighting the fur that's on the animal itself. And you can, if you want to add it, then that can be another layer. So what I've done here is I'm just coloring it, changing the tint and the coloring, and desaturating it to get it closer to the same hues as the human underneath, so it makes an easier blend. Now I've cut and spliced a bit of the forehead from the cat, and I'm actually manipulating that to fit onto this actor. Just because there's some interesting wrinkles, and they're not. What's interesting about this I like is that it's kind of goes against what like a human forehead wrinkle. That's this is more vertical, which is kind of interesting, opposed to more horizontal that we'll see on a human. So I'm just blending, desaturating, and and all that fun stuff. So what I'm doing here next is I'm going to actually, let me see, I'm looking for my folder. Yeah, so ultimately I'm going to end up, trying to find some other elements, for the face that I want to just kind of add these animal aspects to. Since I've kind of started thinking about it being more of a, an cat, then, there's obviously I have a lot of cat reference here. There's lions, there's tigers, oh my. Okay, so what I'm doing here, this is just a way because again, I want him to feel mutated. So I could go several different directions with this. This is a fossilized piece of wood, but it has this interesting element to like this breakup in it, which is going to allow for some breakups in the skin to make it look like he's slightly diseased. He's not a healthy character. He's gone through a lot. One, he's mutated, probably against his will. May not have been born this way, most likely. And in this process, it's had an effect on him. The other is just, kind of, maybe these are scars from fights he's been in. There's all kinds of things. But what's great is it gives me a little bit of a foundation to start creating these details in the face that will make it look, like he's had a hard life, for one. So by putting a textural element on top like that, it helps guide this organic way of painting, and that's what I'm doing here. So part of what I'm thinking with this, I'm messing around with the eyes a little bit as I'm going. I'm spinning. When I start working in this kind of stuff, you'll notice I'm kind of doing a little bit of everything. I see it, I move on. Like I painted his eye over there on the other side to make it feel more like a blind eye. Just again, he's not in the best shape. And now I'm just going in and I'm manipulating some of the wrinkles around the eye. Maybe he's got these weird holes in his nose. So I'm just experimenting with, like where I want to play with the deformity. And that's kind of opposed to going with creature and animal right off the bat. I'm kind of going this direction first, like, because I'm going to organically, and this is part of this process, it's an explorational aspect, is to find where I'm going with a character. You're starting with the human. I want that humanity to maintain in it, so I don't want to change it too much as I'm going to find like the aspects that are important to me right now, which is the uniqueness of his face being like deformed. So that's kind of where I'm going first with this. As I start to move on, I'll start adding other animal aspects into it, like probably the nose, and may even add fur here and there and stuff. But so as I go through, just kind of finding lightening and shadowing places to kind of break up, areas like, maybe there's a scar here on his temple. Like, this one aspect is it could be a scar from an injury that happened, and some of it, this could be a surgical aspect, So there's different ways of thinking about it. If it is, a scar from surgery, then, what would that, maybe it kind of wraps around a bit more, the face or the head, almost a Frankenstein type of scenario. So it's important what I'm doing here is just, to make sure that I'm saving my work too as well. All right, so yeah, I'm going to start right now to start adding some of the animal aspects of it. So this is a lion, a female lion, and it's got like, just great features, but also very strong and powerful aspects to the face. Some of the I even like the patterns around the eyes and the eyebrows, and the nose itself is kind of a cool shape. But I'm going to maintain the deformity, so that's why I kind of did the aspect of deformity first, the irregular aspect of the face, and now I'm going to manipulate this. Now, sometimes before going to liquefy, I'll do that, what you just saw there, which is a warp, using the warp tool. And the warp tool is a great tool just to kind of get, some things lined up in the basic area so that you don't, because the problem with liquefy sometimes if you go too far with it is that you're really stretching the pixels, and you're doing it in an irregular way that makes the pixels sometimes break apart to where they're not as defined as if you use a bit more of kind of a cross between like some of the other transform tools. So right now I'm kind of just, I basically have it on the background layer, which is, and then I'm showing the layer I'm working on, which is actually in front of it, and then this is an opacity, so I go back and forth to see as I'm lining up the eyes, the nose, even though every time I go back to the cat, it's starting to, the lion at least, it's starting to look a little bit messed up, and I'm only going to use aspects of it. So here I just test it out, I go and I make it a soft light, desaturate it a bit, just to make sure that it kind of lines up a bit. So there's things, this is doing some cool stuff around like the brows. I like some of the shapes there. The nose, I want to kind of emphasize that a bit more. So what I'll do is I just copy it, that layer of the nose, by selecting it and then create a normal layer. And then I erase the pieces I need. And I'm doing this just in places I like, because I'm not going to do it on a global level. I'll end up using parts of the line itself that I'm liking in the nose, the brow, how it kind of breaks up the brow itself, here in the around the mouth, so it doesn't look as human. But I do it, carefully as I'm moving on, so I don't really completely change this to just a cat guy. I want there to be a little bit more human, as maintain that as much as I can. Because part of what's really important when you're doing characters for makeup, but also just characters in general, is you want to maintain that that definite humanity, that character that you want to come across. You don't want it to feel generic in a way, because that's not going to help convey the concept of what's going to have to be created, either in CG or prosthetic. Because this could be a combination of a prosthetic mixed with CG, depending on how much this deformity affects the mouth, affects the eyes, the distance of the eyes, and we have separated them slightly. And I may, after I get more things in place, I may actually even move the eyes a bit more further away, just to kind of like give a bit more of the animal aspect. So you'll see that I'm not really getting into the details of the software. I don't think it's necessary. It's not, this tutorial is really more about, kind of my thinking behind it, and just showing you, a process of how I work. One you'll notice is when I'm working fast, I don't really spend that much time on naming the layers as well as I should, which drives certain artists that if they ever have to work on top of my stuff, insane. So I don't recommend that. I recommend, if you have the time, spend the time naming your layers correctly, so you can, if you ever have to go back, you know it's what, and you don't have to try to guess at it. But instead of going through this process for you, I'm not going to waste the time doing that, because that's just more time that of me not working and talking about the process of and the thinking behind designing this character. So what I'm doing here is I'm just selecting aspects of the beard, and kind of blending it in, and just now I'm just going in and painting places on the face to blend all the stuff I just added. So going back to the scar that's around the temple, is like the thinking I was talking about before. Maybe it was a surgical aspect of, he had to transplant part of his brain, or they had to get into his brain to add some of the other components into his his brain to make him more cat-like or animal-like, whatever that, whatever this doctor that has created him is. You know, these are the things that when you're actually designing, um, if you don't always have the answers from the director, what's great about what we do as character designers and and environment and everything that has to do with making a movie and a character in video games is there's a creative process in this. It's an explorational process, and they may not have all the answers. And what I found several times when I've designed in the past is that uh, I'll come up with an idea that's not in the script. Even it may even go against some of the original thought pattern of how a character was created. But by adding certain components and then explaining them what your thought was behind it, then that sometimes the writer and the director will just kind of like go, oh, this is better than what we originally thought. It's makes it creepier for whatever reason, because we're actually opposed to it being like a DNA fusion. It's more a Frankenstein type of scenario where things were cut and spliced and parts of the animal's brain was put in and parts of the face was blended. So which it's all a matter of that's the way I'm thinking when I'm designing this, opposed to what the filmmaker may have been when he was um, thinking of the character. Because what happens a lot of times is like writers and even directors a lot of times will come to us without these answers, and they want help with that because they're thinking about just the story itself, the story, the characters, what's driving it, to move it forward, and not worry about like the details of of what that character looks like. But once they see that and they're explaining that, then it also may help drive it something in the story. Um, there's several films that we've worked on in the past that's this process has really kind of helped drive the direction of a character and also how they came about. So now I'm finding other elements that I like from different photographs that I've found, that I've downloaded, and I'm just going to start blending those. By using a different line, I can kind of utilize some of the other aspects that I didn't see in the other image I was using. Part of it, I want to create a bit more fur on the side of the face, so it kind of blends into the beard a bit, even though I really like the idea of him having actually a very strong beard that feels human. I also want some of these elements of the line itself to be in there on the basically that I couldn't find on the other image. This particular line has some interesting elements in the cheeks and the brows, so I'm just kind of blending that. And once I found it on the one side, I flipped it over, and let's see if there's anything I can use on the nose. The nose felt a little light, so I'm just kind of blending that. There's something interesting about patterns, like if you look at the lion over there, he has kind of a dark nose from the tip to the brow. So trying to blend a little bit of that in there just to kind of help mimic some of these characteristics. Now I took the eye, and instead of putting it through the entire eyeball, it's the lion's eye, I just put it on the iris of the human, scaled it down so that it still maintained his sclera, which is the white part of the eye, which makes him feel a bit more human, for one, and doesn't look like he's just got a big contact in. So now I'm just going in and detailing the nose. Just kind of going in there and kind of changing some of the shape a little bit, and adding details of some of the scar tissue that's around it. So I'll end up, exploring, and sometimes I'll erase things, I'll add on top as I go, because again, this is an explorational process. And right now he's getting some interesting shapes. There's a bit of a muddiness with a bit of the face right now that I want to clean up, and some of that's going to happen with putting a bit more of the human actor back on top as a overlay or a soft light, so it creates a bit more of the highlights and shadows from the original image, which I'll probably do at the very end after I get a little bit more of this stuff kind of worked out. So just going in and kind of breaking up a bit of the ear, so it looks like he's been scarred. It's not a perfect ear that's healthy. He's in every way, this guy is messed up, and that's just kind of part of the thinking. It's like, how far do you go before he becomes a mess, and he's unrecognizable as a face? So you have to be careful that you have fun with this, but then you still want to see the character in there. So yeah, this is just it's a very lengthy process of like just detailing this stuff, but it's so much fun to do this in 2D. This kind of stuff can be done in 3D, of course. It's just the reason I decide to do certain things in 2D and 3D is, like I mentioned in the second chapter, is that it depends on what the outcome should be. Is it going to be something that's going to be fully CG, or is it going to be a guy in a makeup? If it's a guy in a makeup, why spend all that time building a CG model? Because you're going to be fighting a likeness, you're going to be fighting a lot of other elements that, and also it's, in some ways, it can be a lot more time consuming, when this process can go by fairly quick, and it gets the idea, and everybody that, say, whoever this actor may be that they've cast, it's like, they really see and recognize that character. And that's important. Doing likenesses in 3D can be done, they're just a little bit more difficult sometimes. So you'll notice that I flipped the image, and I do this periodically. What it does is it tells your brain a lot of times that when you're looking at something, you flip it to see a different perspective, to see things you may not have noticed, because your eye starts to get used to the image if you look at it from one angle through the entire process of designing. I've done this since from clay. When I used to sculpt in clay, I would actually look in a mirror with the clay. I would take different photographs and different lighting, because the brain starts to recognize certain things and doesn't see the things that may be wrong with it all the time. So getting a different perspective always helps. So what I'm doing here is I just added like this is basically just to kind of rough up the image, because I really want this to, this by adding these elements that I just did, like it was kind of a textural aspect to it, will help kind of create a bit of a breakup, in the image, so it doesn't look so clean, doesn't look so perfect, and gives it a bit more of a presentation of a piece of art. The other is, what it does is it helps blend. By doing that, it's like adding noise to an image. It's blending all the paint from photos and kind of helping that process. So now that I've looked at it for a bit, I've done all this, I've actually took that layer off, or just hid that layer of the texture, and I realized I really want to get more animal in it. It just felt, especially the nose, it's just not enough lion or not enough animal. So I found another image of a lion, and I'm manipulating the nose to fit that to the actor, and may even use like a bit of this kind of beard down below too, just because there's some kind of interesting elements of like the lip of the lion, as well as the facial hair on the lion as well, and kind of blend that into his beard. But one thing I really wanted to get out of this is I wasn't happy with where the nose was. It felt just like a regular human nose. So what I'm doing here is I'm selecting certain areas, and I just lightened it so it's not too dark, and add it on top of the image below, blending it by painting. And here I'm just selecting, like I did before with a nose, but just the beard, so I can kind of add more contrast to it, desaturate it a bit, and just so there's a bit more of that kind of whitish beard, and there's gives a bit more of a distinguished quality, but also kind of gives him that element of a lion, that the animal that he might be mutated from. So I'm just reshaping the nose a bit. Now that I have that, I put a few more scars in the nose too as well, and just kind of warping with paint some of the shapes, so it kind of blends closer to the shape of the actor's nose underneath that I've created a deformity to. Also, I'm getting rid of a little bit of the edge work that makes a cat's nose so distinguishingly a cat, just so it didn't feel like it was just cut out and he's not, definitely not a perfect looking cat. There's elements of it, so it's being selective of how much I use, how much of that um, photo that I actually use on top of him, and just making sure that, you know, as I add all these pieces in, that they seem to blend, you know, into the image that I've created here. So no, this is just kind of like a lot of the final kind of detail components I'm putting in, like really shaping out this nose, shaping out like the brow, you know, just, you know, seeing um, this mutated cat person the way I wanted to see him. So it's really going through and finding elements that don't feel like they're complete or finished, and just tightening that up. There's I mean, it's a lot of fun, and what you'll find, and this is just, you know, on every level, when you're designing, you're sculpting, you're writing, what work is never complete. It's when you basically say, okay, I'm actually done. I can continue going and I can polish this forever, but it serves the purpose of my needs right now. Especially with concept art, you have to really think about, like, you know, what its purpose is. It's not a fine art. You know, you're not trying to tell a complete story or showcase your art in a way that makes you, you know, a fine artist in any way. This is a commercial aspect of what we're designing here for a movie, TV show, or game, and with that, you know, you know, there's a time limit. You know, no one's going to pay you tons and tons of money just to design one image. When they want to see, like, this is just one of like probably 15 or 20 I would do of the same character. So how much time would I spend on just one? I need it to look good enough and tell the director, the filmmaker, everybody that's you know, that's a part of it, even the, you know, makeup artists, if they're doing prosthetic, that this is, you know, what where we're going with it. It answers a lot of the questions that they may have. It's, you know, it's you know, doing photo bashing is part of the beauty of doing it is to convey a photo-like presentation. You know, you can also get that with 3D, of course, but with this, it's like it's really trying to convey to the director, this is what it's going to look like in the movie. Do you like it or not? And and here are the components that I was thinking when I was designing it, how he was put together, how he was created, based on the knowledge I have, and you know, characteristics of how this character is. Say this particular character is a warrior. That's, you know, he was built to basically protect, you know, a person, you know. So this, and in that process, he's like he's ruthless. He just doesn't stop, you know. There could be a component where he's, you know, he's also wanting revenge, you know, for the mutation that's happened to him, and there's an aspect to that could be in the story. All these little things, as you're designing, you want to think about, you know, what you know, the knowledge you have, and how you can really create a compelling character. Because when we're designing characters, it is fundamentally in the design that character is coming through, the personality, you know, of it. There's so many designs in the past, and I've learned the hard way as to if you skimp on the character part of it, and you're just spending time to make it more of a perfect orthographic image without any personality, without any cinematic quality, then it'll lose its effectiveness, because then you're having to not only explain to the filmmakers, the producers, everybody else that's a part of this, what it will look like when it's in the movie. It's better to show what it's going to look like to help answer that question. And that's kind of the process that I try to always achieve when I'm designing. So what I've been doing here is just really kind of scarring up his face as much as possible. You know, you know, scars always, you know, like they say, they add personality and character. So for him, it's how far do you go before it's just too much? So I'm just kind of breaking up all the little kind of details here and there, kind of you know, going through and making sure that everything's looking the way I want it to look. What I'm doing here is selecting areas around the edge and blurring them, the areas that I've actually worked on and done some detail, so that it doesn't look like it's just painted on. It will help blend itself into the other work that's been done so far. Now what I'm doing is I feel like the background is just too, it's all one hue. So what I want to do is select the background. I selected that and I'm adding a little bit of blue, a coolness to it, so that it's not competing with the warmth of the character that I actually want to have you know, stand out, you know, but still feel like it's a part of the background, but not blend in. So that's what this process is. And then I save it, and we are done. Started in a 3D creature design. So under the lightbox, and this is in ZBrush, obviously. There's some pre-made tools in here. So there's this great tool. It's a human body. It's just a generic human body that has eyes, a skull, and a bunch of other fun stuff. But it also has these layers that are built into it. And the layers basically allow that there's some already programmed or shapes that are in there that, you know, for changing the shape of the arms, the length of the arms, and also having the arms kind of down to the side, which I actually like to work when I'm doing a character. I'm making the arms a little longer so I can make it more of a creature, an alien. It also has a mouth control, as you can see the mouth. So if you want a screaming character or the mouth slightly open, it's already set up for that in one of these layers, which is really cool. So it's very helpful, but what I'm going to do is just kind of bake it all so I can actually start to sculpt on it. When it's very difficult to sculpt when the layers are on in this phase unless you're recording for a new layer, but this particular one I think I'm fine with where it's at. So I just turned the eyes on. There's also a skull, but I'm going to right now pose it. So we do transpose, and now I'm going to start just speeding this up so as you can kind of see, so you're not, you know, spending all this time watching me do this little tiny noodles, which is basically just reshaping the face. I'm reducing the ears because I want this to be kind of a cool alien, and human ears are just, you know, too common for a human. So we'll do something different for the ears when we get to that. So right now I'm just trying to make the head shape, the neck, you know, a little bit more alien. I'm going to lengthen the neck itself so that, you know, it's not as squat as a human, because what I'm doing here is just changing a lot of the shape to get rid of the basic human anatomy. Thinking opposed to the last tutorial I was just showing you with Photoshop, which is a lot of thinking in the mindset that it's a makeup. It's going to be done on an application on an actor and maybe some digital augmentation. This is going to be a full CG character. So we can have a little bit more fun with, you know, changing the anatomy and not stick to complete human proportions. Right now I'm just trying to thin up. I'm just going to focus on the upper torso for the most part. I'm not going to worry about the rest of it for this particular tutorial, just because for time purposes, and you know, that'll be another one later down the road. But so right now I'm just starting to, at its lowest poly count here, is just get as much shape as I can. Just reducing the nose because I'm going to do something different with that to get rid of the basic cartilage nose and bone structure that the human face has. Just finding places where I can change the forms, the anatomy, put in some of the muscles and the tendons, and so in this phase I do as much as I can that I know I'm going to be altering, and then I just at that point I go back to get out of transpose. I'm actually going to save it, you know, for this, so that work isn't lost. Now I'm going to subdivide it. couple of times so I can actually have a little bit more work, and then hide the rest of the body and just focus on the upper torso. So here I'm just with hitting the X on the keyboard on a Mac, then it mirrors what I'm doing on both sides. So this is going to make it very easy and fast to be able to create a very symmetrical character and a very symmetrical anatomy on the face. And so right now I'm focusing on just changing the shape of the nose. I'm going to still try to figure out what I'm going to do with the nose but start to put in a bit more of the anatomy as far as I'm going to increase the topology just so I can kind of get in there, because at a certain point, certain shapes I want to start making, I'm not able to get there, especially with the nose. So I want to be able to have enough topology to actually create something, or like sculpt out something that may be interesting. So this character, basically is going to be, the idea it's a humanoid alien, kind of like my own gray alien, your basic gray alien, but it's another take on it. These type of, characters come to us all the time. There's, always get asked to create a new gray alien. So this challenge here is just how do you make it still have a personality, have a character, and look like kind of your gray alien, but do something unique and different with it. But fit that kind of mold of that we've heard about so many times about the gray aliens. The bigger head, kind of the almond-shaped eyes, and sometimes the bulbous head, but sometimes they just have little tiny slits for the nose, but and sometimes almost very little features at all. But I'm going to go with this one as either more of an older, more mature, and also just kind of try something a little bit different from some of the typical gray aliens. And part of it is, like, I see this character, and a lot of these you'll either have dialogue, so I want there to be enough features and facial structure, mouth, everything that you can actually create enough of the dialogue, or however it's speaking, to be able to communicate. So as I continue, I'm just creating like a bit of the muscles, the bone structure, the features. What I'm trying to do here is just reshape the face, but also create a bit of all the basic anatomy that I want to see in this character. Bringing some interesting tendons. Making it's a very sinewy character. A lot of gray aliens usually are these kind of like thin, sinewy characters, but I'm going to go a little bit further with this and add a lot of tendons, and probably when I get into detail, probably a bit more wrinkles, just to give it a bit more age. So it's right here, just trying to figure out like what that shape of that ear could be. Maybe it's it's more concave, opposed to our ears that are out of kind of bulge out of the skull. This one's more internal. Creating just interesting shapes for the head. Some details that I can go back later on and enhance as I go. But this phase is really what I call just the bulking out sketch phase. So I'm just sketching the shape, and I'll, if I don't like it, it's easy to be able to redo anything. But I work as fast as I can with this. This is obviously not real time. It's faster than real time. But this whole process usually doesn't take long at all, especially if you know the basic direction you're going in. And since I've designed so many different gray aliens, I'm always trying to attempt to do something a little bit different with it each time I do it. But then there's a method of certain things that I'll end up going back to. So what I'm trying to do here is just change a bit of the anatomy. Still, there's like the muscles and the bone structure that we would have, but then it's enhanced and it's altered. Again, I think I like creating like points of interest and shapes that kind of come to a peak. So you'll see that in this design is there's quite a bit of like areas that's basically it's all kind of coming to a point and connecting to another bone, like the muscles, the tendons, much like our own anatomy, but really showcasing it in a design. That's what becomes fun, is once you understand basic anatomy, then you can warp it, change it, and alter it, but at least you know kind of where things are landing that feels semi-natural. So I encourage you, if you're, if you're doing a humanoid character, actually any character, is to learn basic anatomy so you understand um, where you can actually apply um, the anatomy that you want to alter. Or if you're, trying to recreate something, it's, something from like an animal or a human, then you need to know exactly what that anatomy is. But for creature design, it's always it's almost it's extremely important. It's like if you're designing a building, you need to know a bit about architecture to understand like how the structure works. Otherwise, it doesn't look sound. So the designing creatures are similar in that sense of understanding the basics. And all the characters that I typically design for film, it's always, even if it's a monster, if it's something you want to convey a character that you can relate to. There's so many incredible designers out there that really push the envelope into places that that go more stylized and abstract from where I usually typically design with, and I'm incredibly huge fan of a lot of those artists, and I think that I've had a few design jobs where that's been requested, and but what I really find the fun for me and the strength is where I actually create a character that has similarities to things that we identify with, that we can evoke an emotion with, and I try to enhance those as much as I can. So with that, I'm just looking at like the face. Where can I actually create like areas on the mouth, the nose, any of the place where around the eyes, anything that can create the character I want to see in this. I mean, he's going to be a kind of this. Again, he's a gray alien, probably doesn't have that much personality, but I want to be able to see that if I needed to push an expression out of him, I could actually achieve that with where I'm going, with the anatomy and the structure. So I've gotten, a little bit past the I call the sketch phase. This is more like the phase of detailing or fine tuning the broad shapes. It's not the detailing yet, really. It's kind of like it's creating like the secondary shapes that make up that the nuances of, say, around the eye, the wrinkles, the tendons, the skin that folds in a unique way. So a lot of times when designing characters too, it's always good to look at reference, for what you want to achieve. Like look at what other artists have done. Look at animals. Look at humans. You look at like humans are doing humanoid characters, of course, or humans are great to look at as far as like especially ones with a lot of character, some age, some that you can see a lot of the shapes, how the skin wraps around the bone, anything that you can gravitate a reference from is once you do it a few times, and you can really start experimenting and having fun with it. So here I'm just creating a bit more like just like these tiny shapes and stuff around the face. Like I did these little wrinkles around the mouth. It's gonna be kind of this, think of it like a character that's an elder, to some extent an elder gray alien. It's been through a bit. You definitely want to save as much as you can. The problem with all computers is that they will crash at some point, and you don't want to be in the middle of something. And even though ZBrush is really good, and you can set it up to where it does an auto save as you go, and by default it already does that. So, but you can speed that up if you don't want to spend the time of like thinking about saving. The saving for me is just like it's second nature. So again, like I said, these kind of like areas like you see around the lips, around the nose, and the chin is all like areas of points. This particular character, I want to feel like that's kind of a theme throughout it. It has these elements of points, and sharpness. And just kind of working on the nostrils, the shape of the cartilage around the nose. So there's a little bit in this nose. There's a bit of a chimpanzee that's been, there's looking at chimpanzees and gorillas actually have, interesting shapes of their nose. This is not by any chance a chimpanzee's nose, but after looking at them, I'm working on Planet of the Apes and many primates in the past, and there's so many ways you can actually structure the nostrils to make them unique and alien, but that kind of dimple that I have up above in the nose, it's like gorillas have that quite a bit with the cartilage. And so, again, like thinking about the structure, the bone structure underneath is when you're sculpting a character, you want to start thinking about like that. You want to really understand, like, well, what if it didn't have skin, it didn't have muscles, what would that bone structure look like? So, and I used to, years ago when I sculpted in clay, I would create a skull first because I wanted to kind of create, understand the anatomy on top of it, and I could actually create some interesting characters that way. But that's also the way I actually ended up doing a lot of likenesses. I did a Lon Chaney years ago that I started with a skull and kind of, created the anatomy looking at old photos of Lon Chaney and built it up from a skull onward. Um, just so I felt like I understood like all the different uh, elements of the shape of the face underneath would be sound, knowing and that was early days of learning of the anatomy of the human body and skull. So I felt like I needed to actually create that. Now I kind of just, when I'm sculpting ZBrush, I don't really waste my time with that. I, kind of already have that kind of programmed in my brain. But sometimes it's a good exercise. So here I'm just trying to make some interesting shapes for the ear, just so there's something a little bit unique. Maybe, thinking again of like, how does this ear work? Like our ear actually has different shapes that actually funnel sound inward. So this could be, similar in that sense, but it's more opposed to, like I said, it's sticking out. It's actually more inverted, but it does have these ribs that give the illusion of that it's actually creating um, pockets for sound to be pulled inward. So now I'm starting to like just create like little bits of anatomy here and there, some wrinkles. I'm pretty pleased with the overall shape and the anatomy of the face right now. I see, a character that I like where it's going. So now it's just a matter of like, starting to put the details. So I'm going in with these wrinkles, and I'm going to do something that's, with this, since it's an alien, I can have a little bit more fun with the wrinkles and not have them completely go exactly, in the same direction that our necks would wrinkle. Because I'm almost thinking of like how the wrinkles are being pulled outward towards these points of interest or points of tension. Creating some kind of interesting tendons inside the neck so that when the neck moves, that you have this kind of like area that looks like it could be pulled very easily. And so yeah, and this is to me, it's like I actually have a ton of fun sculpting. Like I said, I used to sculpt in clay all the time, but ZBrush was a tool that allowed me not to worry about symmetry, which is something you got to be careful with CG and ZBrush. Is you want to, at some point, for the most part, like create asymmetry so that it doesn't feel so perfect and feel CG. But I'm one of those people that really don't like redundant work. So anytime I do something, I'm always going to change it. So if I'm trying to create like wrinkles on one side, it's like, oh geez, I have to do it on the other side. So by having the symmetrical ability here, then it kind of does it for me, and then I can always go back later and change it. So, thinking about wrinkles is you think about like places where the heavier folds. So it's like around the neck there and the jaw. I put the deeper ones because this character, is going to either be yelling or screaming, or its mouth opens up irregularly long. So I wanted to put some wrinkles back there to help illustrate that. And when the animation gets put in play for this, and it all makes sense and it folds correctly. And the jaw may even hyperextend, to some extent that comes like a snake in a way, where it just dislodges. So again, when I'm starting to put these shapes, now that I have like the basic broad stroke anatomy, and you can see I'm just starting to put little bits of wrinkles, details, but I'm going always trying to emphasize the shape that's there already. So these patterns that I create with wrinkles and shape are ones to help influence the overall shape or enhance the shape. Even these tendons and the tendons themselves actually and structure actually help convey an overall. So if you look at it from the side, it's actually the temples or even the shapes are a silhouette of the overall shape of the head, just following the same anatomy. Sometimes putting deeper, like these tendons and muscles I have, I like to create like pockets that make it feel like there's a lot more tension, or there's a stronger muscle back there that's holding up the back of the head. And I'm just putting in some other shapes, some dents here, and occasionally some veins. The skin here is a little tighter because it's wrapped around the cranium, so it's so any of the veins would probably be more visible. This is just kind of my process of just adding detail where it feels like it needs it. You can obviously detail something too much. You can just go crazy, and it feels very much like you lose the form because of the detail that you put in, and you have to be aware of that while you're actually detailing. So like I said, where I'm putting a lot of these wrinkles and these shapes are to help emphasize the overall anatomy that's there. So some of the wrinkles may go against some of the roundness or the form, but by doing that in the right place, it actually helps emphasize that area a bit more in the form. So you really get a sense that of that shape of, with the details that you're adding. So like I said, I'm just putting some veins in here just to kind of like, again, I mean, a lot of humans get this, and especially elder people that basically elder people, yes, elderly or very thin-skinned people, you'll see veins in their forehead or their temples. A lot of ways, looking at this, or someone that's very extremely dehydrated, where the skin there's very little fat whatsoever. And this character right now is the idea that this character has almost zero fat on his body. It's more skin, muscle, and bone, and so that allows for the wrinkles to wrap around the form, and not getting really much of fat pockets anywhere. So, and again, that's this design. A heavier character, I would completely change the direction I actually go with the wrinkles, and emphasize how the pockets of fat or the skin around the fat is being pulled or wrapping around areas. So, as obviously I've been spending a lot of time on the head because, to be honest, is the most important part of the character. There's a lot of shapes here that I want to really emphasize, and soon I'll get into the body and start detailing that. But that's going to go a lot faster because even though it's a bigger mass, it's there's less detailed and complicated forms like that's on the face. The face has just so many different shapes, and you want to really bring out like the elements that's important that you're going to convey around the eyes, the mouth, the nose. All those are going to be important to convey the character that you've created. Now, creating unusual sternums or something that is and tendons throughout the body are just going to take this away from just the human form that we started with and pull it into the more alien creature form that I'm going for. So again, as you can see, I'm creating these tendons, these gaps, but they're going along the line of where all the points of the muscle and the bone would connect. Even if it was human, it's just an exaggeration of that. Part of this too is like, it's finding the forms. It's like that's the sketch phase, which is what I started with, was just a preliminary like overall shape that kind of like got me the basic form that I wanted. But I know that I'll probably end up changing some of that as I create this aspect, which is more of the fine tuning of that form. So now let's try to figure out how the ribs may actually look. That's going to be a little bit different than our own. But again, since this character doesn't have much fat on him at all, almost zero fat, then I want to be able to see the ribs as much as possible. And how do those ribs, differ from ours? So what I'm doing too is you'll see, and when I work, and I did this in the bulk form, but I'm doing it here too, is that as I sculpt, I'll go use just the standard tool, really, to be quite honest. I use the standard tool for a lot of my sculpting. My two tools I really use for the most part is just standard and the hook tool, which is where I get a lot of the big shapes, and when I'm actually pulling those shapes out. So what I'm doing again, like is I sculpt with the standard, and then as I start sculpting and get some shapes, then I'll smooth it out. I use the shift kind of back and forth, and there's also the Alt key, which is basically if I want to be carving inward, then I'll use I'll push the Alt key on the keyboard for the Mac, and then release it if I'm just going to have the it sticking out like bulging out. So it's kind of a back and forth. So I'm creating a weird shaped bicep and some other muscles that wrap around it. Some of it is based on human anatomy, but it's exaggerated and altered. But as I do this, I look at it and I start making the forms that feel appropriate for this character. So that's not a perfect human bicep, of course, but it feels appropriate for the style I'm going with this particular design. And it's part of it is looking at something and making sure that it doesn't feel overly designed, and that's the fine tuning aspect or the fine line of concept design is. Unless someone tells you that it's a very fantasy and stylized look, you want to feel as real as possible. So the natural aspect of it, but you also want to follow certain aesthetic lines that's in nature, and you want to just maintain that as much as you can, exaggerate them where you need to, and then pull back where you don't. So I'm just, as you can see, just going in and adding as much detail into the body, but this is going a lot faster than the face, even though there's a lot of shapes here. Don't underestimate the amount of shapes that are on the body. It's just the subtleness that's in the face is just the more complex. So this model that I started with, again, it was the base. It's one of the base human males in ZBrush is one of their tools that just come with the package, which is great. I use it quite a bit just because it's a great foundation. A lot of times what I end up doing as well as I create, which I'm not doing here, is I started with that, but if I do have a gray alien I've done before, I may just open that one up and remanipulate it in a way that makes it feel unique and different than the design it was originally. But this shows you really how fast you can create a creature, an alien, with the basic tools, very minimal tools, and the basic human tool that you have in ZBrush, which is a standard. There's nothing that was imported, anything. It's all within here, and it's from that you can create something that feels very unique and personal. So it's a really great starting point. Obviously, if you're doing some other creatures, if you have a quadruped that you want to create, there is a dog. You can start with that, or you can do Z spheres or import, another model that you have. So that was feeling pretty good overall about like the anatomy. I'm just going to go in and just start fine-tuning a bit of the detail here, like really emphasizing some of the wrinkles and shapes. This is basically going to be the final touches of the detail, adding like the bit of the wrinkles, and then we'll get into other textures that using alphas, so you don't have to create like every individual pore or every individual wrinkle. What I'm doing here is I'm just doing the major ones that I really want to shape and see. And also adding just bits of imperfection in the face. And a bit more wrinkles and just something to give it a bit more irregular and character elements. But what's great about this face, you can see that this could have a lot of expression, with the wrinkles around the mouth, but it looks like this character could be a character that could have evoke a lot of emotion, with the brows and the mouth. And what's great about, those are the areas that you really want to focus on with a character that has to evoke motion, is the eyes and the mouth. The nose itself that's why, you can go really kind of stylized with it. If you think about the nose, certain animals can, use their nose for expression to some extent. And obviously the upper part of the nose, there's a lot of wrinkles when you're screaming or pissed, but those are the areas, the top of the skull, the areas that don't move that you can really be creative with. And if you're doing an alien, you might as well. So just kind of like starting to, all the wrinkles and all the detail that I put in, I'm just trying to bring that detail out a little bit further, just to emphasize a bit more. So after this, we'll be getting into a bit more of how this character is going to look when we get into rendering and texturing. So we'll be using KeyShot quite a bit for that, and be going through. And there's a great plugin for KeyShot and ZBrush to get to work back and forth. And that's once you get a certain amount. What you'll notice too is that, and we'll get into that a bit more detailed if you've used this before, is that ZBrush has a tendency, because of especially the shader that we use, there's a lot more detail that shows up in ZBrush than does. Even the form sometimes gets softened when it's exported out to as an OBJ or into KeyShot. and I'll explain how to actually emphasize that and bring that out more here in just a bit. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the overall shape. This feels, I mean, it's a subtle, gray alien character, but it's a bit more personality than we've seen in your standard, gray alien that just has almond eyes and almost no nose. All right, now I'm going to go into just adding like the other secondary. This is actually the details, like the pores. So using again the standard tool in the alpha, there's there's a bunch of different alpha tools you'll see in there. If you actually, it's over to the left. You'll see the little speckle. I picked the speckled alpha, and what I'm doing is I'm just creating basically pores, and this is just to break up the surface, so it's not glass smooth, and it just has a bunch of wrinkles I sculpted in. This is a very fast way of adding the fine detail that all skin has. And so I'm going really light with this because, again, I don't want to obscure or damage the work that I've done so far, and I'll be able to emphasize this and bring this out even more when we get into the texturing aspect of bringing out the forms that, like I said, that you may lose in KeyShot. So just kind of like using that same one, for the most part, just over the entire body, and just to kind of break up the surface. So I'm just quickly just brushing it on. And if you look over to the left, it's like I'm using the standard, but I'm using the type of brush. It's pretty much what I've been using for all the sculpting as well. It's the same tools. It's just now we're using an alpha. So it's just breaking up the surface evenly for the most part. But what's great about this is as much using a really good Wacom tablet with the sensitivity, you can actually decide if you want by adding more pressure, just like when we're sculpting, is to be able to create more detail in the pores, as well as you can change the intensity. I have it at a very low intensity, so it doesn't, again, like I can detail it as I go. So right here, or just add more as I go. Right here, I just changed the brush, the alpha, to more of these little, you'll see these little scratchy lines and stuff. So what this is doing is just all like the little wrinkles that I put in, it's just adding a bit more of that. Phase is texturing. So using ZBrush, we'll end up doing a color texture that we can actually import into KeyShot. So here's a just reference. So this is a KeyShot plugin that is directly from ZBrush to KeyShot. It's very cool. It's very useful, and you can go back and forth, which makes it very useful as a tool to see what kind of work you're actually achieving as you're moving forward texturing. So let's zoom in on this character. This is KeyShot. Imported it from ZBrush. It still has the material from ZBrush, and it tries to do the best it can to mimic the same material that's in there. But as you can see, it doesn't have the same detail that ZBrush has. Right now I'm just changing the lens so that it's less distorted, a bit flatter, closer to a long lens opposed to a fisheye, so that we're actually seeing closer to what we actually were working in with ZBrush, and just kind of neutralizing it a bit so it's not so distorted. I'm now putting on an ambient occlusion material and KeyShot, and I'm just adjusting the intensity of the fall off so we can really see if more of that detail comes through. The ZBrush material that comes into KeyShot really doesn't do the best job as far as mimicking everything that that you see in KeyShot. So you have to kind of cheat it here. Now I put in a background. This is an HDR map that comes with KeyShot, which is really cool. They have some really cool stuff. You can import your own as well. And I just have this basic room with, some, what I like to do is kind of like change the height so it's not I'm distracted by the background, but at least you can obviously put a different background in if you need to, but I kind of like to see the hues that are here within this room while I'm working to make sure that it's kind of hitting the same kind of tones and feels like it's integrated into the scene. And for a headshot like this, which that's what we're going to focus on, this kind of portrait style, we're going to do kind of a shallow depth of field anyway, so the background's going to be less important. It's just there to kind of help make sure that the colors and it's just kind of a a neutral for the scene that we're creating. So this is a different background. There's a few different you'll see in the interior section, but what I want is this kind of top lit light that's going to help kind of show off the contours that we've sculpted and see how far the detail shows with this ambient occlusion material that we're using. And so as I just kind of see where we're at, it takes just a little bit. This is as real-time as it can be. It's not actual real-time rendering, but it's fairly damn close. So you can see as it's trying to update as it's going. I just changed out the eyes to more of a liquid milk or something, so and now I'm going to change it to black. But it'll have the refraction and reflection that I like that's in the liquid milk material that they actually just have here. You can adjust it, of course, but this is just to kind of see, right now it's just to preview what we have already so that when we go back to ZBrush, we know what we're working with. So just trying to find a good angle that showcases some of the shape of the head, the also contours and the detail that is sculpted into this character. And I think kind of a 3/4. I prefer a 3/4 myself. Doing straight-ons are only if the client really asks or if it's for a certain type of thing that you're trying to hit impact-wise for a straight-on. But 3/4 is good because it takes care of like a straight-on view and a profile view all in one. So when the client sees it, they kind of get the overall gist of the character, shape of the head, and everything else that is necessary moving forward. So I'm doing a skin shader. I've adjusted a little bit. There's these in the materials in KeyShot, they have some materials that are translucent, like wax and skin, a couple of variations on skin, and I've kind of created my own for just for my needs. You can obviously save them out as you work on them so that you can always come back to them, and that's kind of what I've created here in this folder that's called miscellaneous. I'm saving it out so I have something I can always come back to, just in case. You never know when you've set it up and then you're happy with it and the computer or the software crashes and then you lose everything. So it's always good to save. So now back to ZBrush, and what we're going to do here is I'm going to, because we noticed that the detail wasn't really showing up, I use masking. This is another way of showcasing some of the detail that we put in here when we start doing some polypaint, polypaint is the paint tools that we use within ZBrush to create like a paint that we can actually either turn into a texture or using ZBrush KeyShot. So what I've done is I've used a concaved material and I inverted it so I can kind of see how it looks. There's this model already has these separated polygroups, which I'm just going to paint out. So you basically turn off Z tool and moving and all that, and just use RGB with a basic brush and find a basic flesh color that I'm applying here all over. And to get rid of the kind of polygroups that were colorized here when we actually hit polypaint. And now that we have a good base, we can go back to our masking, concave masking, and it finds all the contours within the this particular one. There's so many different ones. You can do ambient occlusion, everything else, but this one particular concave works the best for our needs here to showcase the texture. And I invert it so that when I paint this darker color, it paints the shadows of the deeper areas. And so when we turn this off, you can see what it's doing. I just kind of took, clear so we can actually see what we're working on, but it's still there as we actually paint in the masking tools. It just gives you a preference here on the right. And so I'm just painting in this kind of warm, kind of base color. And so going with kind of this warmer color after you have like this base is good. It's like a burnt sienna. Sometimes like a burnt umber is good as well. But I've created this, and these are just base color names. They don't necessarily exist here in here. It's just a color I'm actually referring to. So now I've actually now what I'm going to do is you can see how intense it is. It's really, really intense. So what I've done is now I'm going to do a wash. I'm actually going to turn the masking off, but turn the opacity really, really low on the brush so that as we paint the base color back on, that we can. It's just kind of like a wash. So what we've done here is we've created this is in the practical world, which is where I started in the 80s and 90s, is creating puppets and painting foam latex to make them look translucent. I would do these things like this where we'd actually create some kind of a stain wash over the sculpt so that it would kind of come out, and then and I would actually do this when we actually start having more like silicones and translucent materials as well in the real world, but these were cheats to kind of help bring out the detail. And in nature, sometimes that happens. You'll see, like if you look at the palm of your hand, you see all the wrinkles in them are actually darker than a lot of the other materials. So that's kind of what this is doing. It's kind of mimicking those natural concaved areas, and what I'm doing is just putting, again, a quick wash of the base color, not too opaque because we don't lose all that detail, otherwise it's pointless. You just want to be able to see the detail that is in there, but also not make it look so distracting. Like what's great about this is this gives you the flexibility opposed to doing an ambient occlusion or something in KeyShot. You can obviously do that as a pass, but this gives you like a more natural way of how that's going to look. Instead of doing a lot of layers and then figuring out that it doesn't really, in KeyShot and passes, then you bring it in and Photoshop to comp them, which I do quite a bit, but it's good to get a base that's pretty damn close, and then you can add all those other adjustments to it. So what I'm doing is we actually have to change some of the values here. I'm going to bring it back to KeyShot. I want to be able to have the materials update. So when we actually see this now, we can see that it updated the materials in KeyShot. It's actually applying a lot of the same materials. There's even a sheen a little bit that we actually have in our materials that we've created. It's not as intense as we see here, but now we're seeing that that's all that detail that we lost in KeyShot from ZBrush is now starting to work its way back based on this technique of painting in the concaved areas. And now what I'm going to do is I took the sheen off, so the speck off, so that I can work on this and create a more realistic look. As I move forward, I'm creating some other values and colors. So this is I've created a blue color for the veins and underneath the eyelids, and just various hollow areas that around the face that we're going to want to break up, so it doesn't feel like it's all just one color with a big stain on it. So Going in lightly. This is, again, really low opacity. You don't want to go too heavy with this because otherwise you're going to have to fight it. And if you end up painting it a little too deep, then and you go put back your base color as a wash, then you're going to lose even more of your the work that you applied early on by just putting this wash on. So these are just techniques that help you break it up, color wise, and feel natural. The hollow areas. Some are the veins that are obvious, like I'm painting in, but also the hollow areas of these big areas, like underneath the cheeks, inside the eyes, sockets, any type of cavity where there's a lot of um, indented areas. I'll apply this. Now what I've done is I've actually created a warmer color. So this warmer color is where I'm applying inside the kind of areas, exposed areas like the eyelids, the tear ducts, the inside of the nostrils and ears. And so again, this is just another way of breaking up color-wise. And then I like to go back and forth because, KeyShot, you see a lot more intensity when you're in ZBrush. When you go into KeyShot, you go, it's actually a lot more subtle. So sometimes you have to push it, but you don't want to push it too far to where it feels cartoony or feels overly painted. You want it to feel natural. So what's good to really look at is look at nature, look at your own skin. Like I said, these shadowed areas that we applied inside the concaved areas are quite a bit like any of the wrinkles that you have in your, like behind your knees, your inside your palm and your wrist, anywhere that you see, these deep wrinkles, they'll be kind of this darker, a bit of a darker color. So that's what we're mimicking here. Now we've applied this a lighter color that we're actually going to create on the high points. This is going to be an overall wash, but for the most part, I'm going to apply this on where and how you look at this is where blood is less uh, the opacity of the blood, and actually it's thinner blood, is where it's closest to skin and bone, opposed to a lot of fatty tissue or muscle tissue. So a good way to look at this and understand what I'm talking about is, and if you make yourself a fist, look at your knuckles and you see how they turn lighter when you actually make a knuckle, and they actually have a yellowy kind of tint to them as well. And what that is it's basically it's the blood is being pushed away from that area, um, and so there's less blood. So it's bone closer to skin. And so that's what we're trying to do in some of these areas that feel like they're very taut. And then on top of that, I'm just creating a bit of a wash again after I put the blues and a breakup. So I've applied, if you notice, I've applied this other value that's, or it's actually I'm using an alpha, and the alpha itself is a speckled. So it's not going to be as just a simple wash of just a big brush. It's going to break it up in little tiny speckles. And right now I'm using a softer speckle it's actually a blurred. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to use a harder one. You can see I just changed it out to a less blurred speckled, so that when we actually see some of these speckles or these highlights, that they won't obscure some of the detail that we have there, that we're doing with the kind of a blurred overall, because it wasn't really showing up as much. So this goes back to look at again your palm of your hand. And you'll see almost these little speckles of highlights, and those are breakups of skin cells and blood cells and all of that kind of give that natural translucency. But so that's what we're trying to apply here. Is obviously we can make this character like any color we want. I'm going first, and this is the base. Is like I'm going more with a natural kind of, I would say, a lighter skinned Caucasian, or for this we're doing a gray alien, so there's these gray elements to it too as well by doing this. But these all apply for any color, but it's really good to kind of start here with this kind of paler color, because you can always darken it, it's harder to actually add, if you start with a really dark, say this, you want this creature to be green, completely green, or blue, or purple, or whatever else. It's like, then you're going to be fighting that constantly as you're doing this. So what I try to do is always do it with a kind of a neutral base, pale color that I can really do all the breakups, and I can slowly start to add color into it. So if I want to create this, if I want to make this whole thing green, at least it will have all those breakups that I created already. But if I start green and then I wanted to change it to another color, I'm going to be fighting that constantly. So this is why it's kind of just a standard what I do when I'm doing a character, unless the character they come in and say is charcoal black. It's like, but I may still do aspects of this because I can always darken this. It's easier than vice versa, making something that's very dark and intense and has a really broad color to it that now you have to fight. So I'm rambling as I do sometimes when I'm working, but I'm just kind of giving you the insight a bit of how what I'm thinking as I'm working and my techniques and why I chose these techniques and this color for whatever I'm going to be doing further on. So I focused on the upper part of this. I'm not going to worry that much. Like I even, there's a whole body that we've slightly created. We didn't really get into detail when we were sculpting it. Because this is, again, when I'm starting on a character, I start on the bust. I do a bust first because what I want to do with that is achieve the character, which is really in the head, the face. And then if a client likes it, then you can create the body from that because it helps to understand your character from the head first. And sometimes if you have a full body, it can be very distracting for clients. They may not see the details in the face. They're obsessed with the hands or the feet or the way the midsection looks. What I just did there was going back and forth, to ZBrush just to see, KeyShot, to see how all this is looking, and I'm getting pleased with the results so far, which is good. It is subtle, but it's like, again, we don't want to be too heavy-handed with a lot of the work we're doing here because, again, it's going to be harder to break that down later on. If we want to, we're actually going to be competing with, if you go to, say you want to do a lot of textures or a lot of patterns on this. Patterns I do after this fact, after this process. Because if you do the patterns while you're doing this, and say you don't like the patterns, then you have to start all over. But by this, you have a base, and then you can save it out and start doing different patterns and save those and render them out as different patterns. And patterns, I mean like, how reptiles or frogs have, or other, species have like, patterns to their skin that make them either different colors or darker patches that create these breakups. So I'm just going in and adding, a bit of blues here and there and some details where I want it. Just kind of, now that I have a base and I have like some breakup, I'm just seeing where I need to break it up even more. Like, add some, is that tendon have a blueness to it? Is it, or is it, yellow, or a lighter color? Even adding, going back into the veins, because now that I see that they don't show up as well, especially when we go back to KeyShot, you kind of see, does it work, does it not? Just kind of the socket areas. Usually in the eye socket, is where I'll add a lot of blues too, here and there, just because it's where a lot of the blood vessels are closer to the skin. The skin is thinner. And so these are just, breaking up areas around the wrinkles. And the idea here is to just have again, like a really good base. And so the process after we get something painted, we render it out, and if a client likes the look of it, based on the bust, because I always usually start with a bust first, because again, that is the character itself is really the eyes, the mouth. The head is really the character. And that head dictates, the body type. So this, as you can tell, is a very thin and long neck and long face. So this body's going to be, similar. It's not going to have, a big heavy body based on this anatomy. So the clients are going to know that already. And if they like this, then, you're going in the right direction. If they don't like it and they say, oh, we want to be heavier or more muscular or whatever, then you didn't waste your time designing an entire body. And with this too, is you're going to start doing, once you have a character to create a base face, like this is what I call a neutral face, is that, you start to, you can do expressions, give it a lot of character based on its expression. Make it smile, make it scream, make it whatever, but now you have your base. So I'm just adding a little bit of redness inside the areas I was before. Like, this is one of those I'll go back and forth, like inside the nostrils, inside the tear duct, inside the ears, just so they stand out when I render it, that I can see that those are more open areas of the tissue, more exposed areas, and then around some of the wrinkles here and there, bring them out. And again, this is just, you'll see me do these like a little random movements, and those a lot of times for the paint is just to kind of break them up. So a lot of times you'll see in what's great about, ZBrush and a lot of the computer software that's 3D based is that, the symmetrical aspect. Now symmetrical can be a problem because it can look overly perfect. Now we could do this right now. What I'm doing is I'm just breaking up the skin. Now I've turned the symmetry off and I'm asymmetrical right now, and I'm actually putting molds in, or little freckles, or anything to kind of hear. So when you see it, that it starts to break the eye from its symmetry. Now you can do this with the sculpting as well, and I didn't really show that part of it. I do that quite a bit to break up symmetry, and especially with, so this is an alien. A lot of times with aliens, it'll be, and creatures that, they're, that are basically born this way and not deformed, I'll go very symmetrical and I'll break it up a little bit for the organic quality. But say that when I'm doing a demon or something that's, for a horror film, I'll actually go a lot more asymmetrical, because there's something unsettling about asymmetry. There's something, and it feels unnatural. There's something that feels very natural about symmetry. And it's one of those that's when we're creating a creature that was born this way, that's not supposed to be deformed, it's an alien, I always typically go more symmetrical, unless say it's The Thing, from John Carpenter's The Thing, which is that was one of my favorite movies in the 80s, and it was every cell in the body was an organism, so it's going to be asymmetrical because it's constantly changing itself. So I made a point about aliens being a certain way, but it varies on the topic and the film itself, obviously. So here I'm just going in, as you can see, and just adding these random little spots, and some I'll make darker than others, and just think of them as molds. They're ways of kind of giving the character a bit of realism of all the imperfections that we actually have as humans. So I add a little bit more spec, and I'm going to go, just kind of break up the material here, and I just want to see how it looks in ZBrush, and then I'll bring it into KeyShot. I mean, I'll adjust the material, and this is what we'll get into in the next chapter, is really in the rendering aspect of it, but I like to get an idea. This gives you just a basic idea by using some of the materials, and KeyShot tries to do the best job as it can to create and mimic a lot of the same materials that you're creating here, but it's not going to do a perfect job. So what I'm trying to do is, like, I'm experimenting with cavities and all this other stuff in here, and I can go into best render, and you can see it's over the top here, but this is like creating almost ambient occlusion. So now I'm going to go back to ZBrush, see what it looks like, and a little of that was applied. It's again it just some things it cannot do. It cannot take all the nuances that we just saw in that render here in ZBrush and mimic it, but I'm just looking at if I apply that, what would the impact be in here? So it's kind of a back and forth. I'm messing around with let's play around with the eyes again. I think because of the back and forth of a lot of these, like rendering and use the materials. It's use the materials from ZBrush as I change that as a preference, and now I'm just starting to try to get it back to where it was. So just playing with the colors here to get it, and also the spec for the skin, to get closer to. What's great about specular is and you have to be careful. Is if you go too far with it, then it feels very CG. But if you don't go far enough, then you lose a lot of your detail, because it helps bring out some of the detail by having speck and shadows. And speck being, obviously, I think everybody knows what speck is, but the highlights, the shiny aspect of it. So, getting very close to where, I think it's a good place. Here, it's subtle in a lot of ways, and that's kind of the way I want it to feel. I don't want it to feel over the top. You can see the veins here and there in the shoulder. You can see other aspects of things that are showing up. I'm just applying some other contrast issues to the HDR, which is great. You can adjust the HDR so that it's not subjected to the exact way it comes in. So you can play with the contrast, the brightness, the darkness, and even the hue if you want to change the hue of it. I'm just adjusting that so that one, it stands out from the background, because what I'll end up doing, even though I can put a different background behind it, I want it to feel like it's integrated within this background. And the other is I do want the highlights to be a little punchier and the shadows to be a little punchier. It can get a little bit, sometimes you'll notice in KeyShot, sometimes it feels a little soft or a little less contrasty. And I really like to have a bit more contrast in my renders. I can obviously do a lot of this in Photoshop at the end and just add more contrast, but I like places to be when I'm rendering, and it doesn't take long, but to get them close enough to where I understand what they're going to look like. And then I can do all the final stuff in Photoshop. Alright, so we have our base here, which looks really good as a base. Let's warm up a few places here and there. And I think I'm going to add a few little patterns, just kind of break up, thinking about where I could actually add some patterns to just make this character so he's not just one tone. I mean, even though you can see a lot of variations, you see a lot more in ZBrush than you do in KeyShot, but just breaking up these, because I feel like there's certain areas that I really didn't see come out as much as I wanted to in KeyShot, so I'm just kind of emphasizing them with some of the breakups here and there with the warm colors. So I find there's a bunch of different or patterns. I'm just going to do some real quick, again going back to the speckled that I use for the highlights. You can intensify them as making them a little harsher, as far as the intensity, also making the brush a little bigger. And I'm going with a kind of a warmer breakup here. And I'm doing it symmetrically, because a lot of times if you look at certain reptiles, they do tend to, and even insects and everything else, they do tend to have these very symmetrical breakups. And then there's here and there some asymmetrical aspects, which we'll add later in Photoshop. So I'm just doing this quickly, and and then we'll go into render, and I think we're in a good place. Alright, now that we've textured in ZBrush, we're in KeyShot, and we're going to do a bit of rendering, and we've kind of got a base at lighting-wise that was interesting, and I'm just going to experiment with a little bit of the shaders here and see where we can push the face a bit more as far as spec and refraction and reflection and some breakup. So this is where we were using a lot of the ZBrush shaders, and And those were helpful, but and tweaking a little bit in here. But now I'm going to play around with different lighting scenarios and see what actually may look a little better with our character now that we actually have it textured. So I'm trying a warmer environment to see if is that something that it may work. Is the lighting more interesting here? Part of this is there's quite a few HDR maps that you can use, but you can also bring in your own, create your own. And it's a great natural way to create an environment lighting wise and not using a bunch of lights. You're using the photographs, the HDR, to incorporate where the shadows, the light, and spec is coming from. So this room here is a little cooler, more fluorescent, feels a little bit more, to some extent, sterile, but there's also some interesting dramatic lighting here, as far as it's top lit, the shadows in the eyes are a little concaved. We can always, like I said, go back and intensify the contrast or find another HDR if we need to. So what I'm doing here is just trying to find a base one that we may start with, may use, and then we'll go back to ZBrush and start posing this character, because right now he just looks like he's looking straight out, and it's kind of relatively boring. When doing characters, you don't have to go over the top with a pose, but it's a good idea to give it, some kind of a base pose of something that. So let's go back to ZBrush and do that right now. Here's our character. Now we're going to go and pose this guy out. I like to save it as I'm going so I don't screw up any work that I'm doing as I'm moving forward. Now if we go to polytrans, it'll bring it down to its lowest subdivision, which we did when we were sculpting early on. Now I'm selecting just the head. This material it's on, for some reason it's painted up, so I just turned it to a neutral opposed to red so we can see what we're doing, more of a lighter color. So this is just masking, just going to mask the head, and I basically want to just turn the head a little bit so it looks like it's either looking at us or looking away or something, just to give it a little bit more personality. So I'm just selecting that area, and then if you click on it, the area that you've selected, it will soften that blend. So I just did that real quick. And now, let's see, let's just rotate. And you want to turn off the orientation that's global, so that it's just more centralized and local. All right, so let's rotate it, and then sometimes after rotating, we end up having to, let's just see how that looks. Again, I want it just to be subtle. I just want there to be, so it's not so stiff looking straight out. Now I'm going to move it a little bit so that, so sometimes just rotate and move and just kind of get it so that it doesn't look too awkward. There's a bit of a deformity underneath the chin there. Yeah, so so what I'm going to do, I just need to clean this up, because as you can see, sometimes if you don't select underneath the chin properly, the jaw, or wherever you're trying to move enough, then that gets deformed in a very unattractive way, unnatural way as well. So I'm just going in with the masking tool and making sure that it's selected correctly to where I want, so that when we move the head, that the chin isn't being pulled in an inappropriate way. All right, rotate it around. Again, just want to get some kind of a twist or a turn so it looks like he's looking. There's a bit of a, let's move it a little bit so we're just like we did before, so everything kind of lines up. So probably render from this angle, even though there's a bit of stretching under here. You can spend a bit more time when you're doing your masking to get this a little bit better, but also you can also just resculpt it, which is done quite a bit. You have to. It's almost like there's muscles being taught and turned a certain way, and so no matter how you mask it, there's going to have to be a little bit of resculpting for it to be natural. All right, so you go in and detail it more, but I'm not going to be spending that much time from that angle. I think I'm going to, for this particular thing, we're going to be rendering from this right side of the face, his right side. All right, so this is just updating. As it updates, hopefully everything goes back in place where it should. And why didn't the eyes go back in place? It's odd. There we go. Okay. All right. So it's popped back into place, and now it's a couple of little things like we see underneath the neck. There's a bit of a twist there. Then bring it down to the lowest subdivision and just use the snake hook and pull that. I've got to turn the texture off so we don't destroy our poly paint. So you turn the poly paint off, just straightening out that, put the poly paint back on after we get it all straightened out. All right, that's looking better. Cool. All right, let's turn the poly paint back on, and now let's go back to a higher subdivision, our maximum subdivision, so everything gets updated. All right, so now, even though we're not going to see the rest of the body, I'm just going to unselect all that because we really didn't work on it that well. And again, this is all about the portrait. If a client wants to see a bit more, we can do a render that's a little further away, but for this exercise, we're just doing the portrait. So I'm going to save it as a posed, just so I can, just in case I want to go to another pose, like a posed 1 or something like that, so I can change different poses for different renders. And then we're going to go back to KeyShot. Just a little update in KeyShot, and you'll see it pops right into place. That's the greatest thing about this. So any updates you're doing, and we saw this in the texturing aspect as we were moving forward, that we could go back and forth, and it's just such a great marriage between these two softwares where as you're working you can quickly do updates and see the result and render, and the fact that KeyShot renders almost instantaneous, that you're really getting to see the results instantaneously and not having to wait to go to another software where you have to go into light it, render it, and all that other fun stuff. All right, so just finding a good angle, and now we come in here. I'm going to just mess around again with the materials now that we've posted it and it's been updated, because when we update it in there, it also updates everything else. So if we like the spec, then it may not maintain that spec. I mean, I can turn some of those aspects of the material off so it only will go back to the pose, but I neglected to do that. But at the same time, I just want, doesn't take long, and now that we see it, we're going to change it anyway. We would have most likely, so adjusted the materials, I'm meaning. So this is good lighting, because what it is, it's enough where you can really showcase the face. All the contours, all the detail is really, it's not hidden too much. So as a concept piece, this is probably going to be a good angle, a good pose. And I'm just changing the reflection in the skin so that we can see a bit more detail, and changing out the eyes. Okay. All right. Let's see. Now I'm going to mess around. Let's see. Let's go back to mess around with the camera here. because we're going to go back and forth. I mean, we're going to start rendering here soon because it's actually not in a bad place. So what I want to do is basically make sure the materials I'm happy with. And then we'll go to camera, and I'm going to turn depth of field on. So the depth of field is great because the depth of field will allow this to be a bit more cinematic and feel, less digital in a sense that it's, it's using photography properties. All right, so I'm going to render this out. So what I did is I selected a look or for the render. I'm also, making it localized so I can know exactly where the folder is. Put in the proper chapter. And then we'll go to render here. Let's see. So the rendering will take, just a little bit. I mean, it's as much as I say it's real time, it's GPU opposed to CPU, so it's not. It's using the graphics card to render more than it is CPU, which is kind of the future of rendering. I think that this is still not real time, even though it looks like it was right there, just clicked on, but I actually paused it so you didn't have to endure the slowness of this render. So this is one of the renders that we did. I'm going to mess around with some other materials. So now we have our base, and this came right out of ZBrush, and we did some adjustments. Now there's some other stuff that we went messing around with, and this is if you go to advanced under materials of the same, so you don't change the material over on the left, you do it on the right. I went to a translucent, so I can actually play around with a little bit of a skin shader, so that now it's going to have a more translucent quality that you can't really get as well in ZBrush with any of the materials. KeyShot has some really interesting properties here, so I'm just adjusting some of those. And to get kind of that interesting skin shader that is going to get us where we want for the translucency. And this may be the base that we use, or we may just combine it in Photoshop. So what I like to do is do just a few, like not too many passes of different materials. Maybe three. Sometimes more depending on what it is. But like when it's a creature skin based organic creature, I'll do like a translucent, I'll do an opaque like the first one, and then I'll probably do an ambient occlusion. That way I have those three I can actually manipulate in Photoshop and then start to colorize and add other patterns that we didn't do in ZBrush, which will make it faster for the end result. So as I adjust, you can see like in KeyShot, it's pretty fast, but when you adjust one aspect of the material, then it starts from scratch. It starts to update, and it takes a little bit before you see what you're doing. So what I did is I changed the spec. So the spec actually has a bit more of a bluish tone to it. So it's, in a way, it's like almost like playing around with iridescence to some extent. That way, it's like the highlights here will have a bluer tone. It just felt a little cartoony, so I'm just taking it down to have a cooler but not as blue. Again, every time I render, unless I'm doing it for just a pass, I try to make each render stand alone as a final piece that I can use, or a final render. And again, this doesn't take long. You just spend a little bit of time tweaking and experimenting. And what you want to do is if you start to mess around with any of these materials, don't play around with the lights as much, because then you're going to have a harder time when you go to render. Because if, say, the highlight on the top of the head changes because you actually change the lighting, then that's going to be kind of useless when you comp it. It'll just look muddy. So here I'm rendering it. That's it rendered. It, again, I just sped it up so you didn't have to endure that. And now we have a skin shader, and we also have our base one that we brought in from ZBrush that we adjusted. So just pause it there, and I'm going to save it, and I'm going to go to Photoshop, and I'm going to show you how I'm combining these concepts as well. I'm just saving everything out. So it's always good to save so you don't lose anything. When you have like 3 or 4 programs going at once, then you have a good tendency that something's going to crash. All right, so I'm going to go where I saved it. I'm in Photoshop, and there wasn't that many passes I did. I just did a couple. There was an ambient occlusion I did, and that was in one of the passes. I forgot to mention that when I was actually rendering. You can ask it to actually do an ambient occlusion. We'll see if we're going to use it or not, but so I'm just changing the exposure of it, see if there's anything I can gain from that. The good thing about this sometimes is it just kind of brings out some of the detail that may not be in the render that you may have lost, especially if you do really translucent skin shaders. I may or may not use it, but it's always good to have as a backup. So I have these two, and they don't really look that much different. One is more translucent than the other and has like kind of a bluish speck. And so I just copied the other one on top of each other. So I have these two. I can flip back and forth. Just gonna close that up so I keep it clean. I'm not really going to use the ambient occlusion. I think there's enough information here right now. So I'm going to create a new layer. And so with this, I can go in, and what I'm going to do is also wait. Let me select these two and duplicate them. And then I'm going to just merge them down into one layer so I can, and I still have the original two underneath, but now I'm going to add a bit more contrast because it just felt a little flat to some extent. Now it's by adding a little bit more contrast, you can see all the detail that's in the render that came out, which is pretty cool. And this is, without doing anything in Photoshop yet. It's just kind of the base render. So that's the beauty of, doing a lot of work in ZBrush and KeyShot. So you're getting a pretty good first render concept right out of the boat. So I just cropped it so that it's more portrait style, so we had a lot of dead space there. Now this extra layer I created was just kind of, I'm going to scale this up, and I'm going to create change my brush. I'm going to create a vignetting. I mean, I can do this in different ways, but here I'm just creating a layer on top. What I like to do with vignetting is, again, it focuses the eye towards the center, towards the subject, and it's a framing device that is used in art, and it's been in art for forever. So as I just apply this, I'm just slowly, I'm just gradually putting this on to make sure that I don't go too heavy-handed with it to where it feels just overly painted. The idea is just to kind of make it there subtly that is enough to draw your eye towards the subject. So just blending a little bit. And I do it down at the base, not just the sides. And I didn't do it at the top because the top is where the light source is, so it gives the illusion that there's a top light as well. All right, so saving this. Now that we've created this base image that we're going to use. All right. So now we're just going to do some, I'm selecting the forehead and the chest, and I actually selected the and duplicated it. Now I'm just going to darken it. So this is a way of creating a pattern really quick in Photoshop. So I could have done this in when I was painting it, but then I would have been forced with just having that one pattern. So what's great about Photoshop by doing this is I can do 100 different patterns this way. I'm just going to show one right now just so you can kind of see the process. It looks a little bit like a rash, so I'm going to change it into a bluish tone or some other color that doesn't feel like it's got, I mean, it could be a birthmark, but let me just take the opacity down a bit too as well, and we basically have our design here. It's in a good place. This is one example of designing using 3D and very little Photoshop. There's you could go a lot further, and I actually quite a few times I'll end up doing a lot more Photoshop with the final piece, but I wanted to really illustrate how you can just go right from ZBrush, KeyShot, and very little Photoshop and very little 2D and keep it all 3D. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on the way I actually work using 3D, and there we are. All right, so our conclusion with everything and just kind of an overview is so here's our alien that we designed in 3D, and the reason for this is knowing that this is most likely going to be a CG character. And now we have also what's the benefit of this, and I explained it in the chapters, but to go over it again is that we can now use this as an asset. We can show this from different angles. We can do some motion studies. We can either do the visual effects using now this as a base. We'd re-topo it and do it correctly and create the right UVs and everything like that to make it proper, and the shaders and all that stuff. But what this does is it's less guesswork. So the benefit of 3D as an overview, knowing that your creature and character is going to be 3D, is that now you have something that can be used, and it's not going to have to be interpreted by another visual effects house, production, or anyone else that may have to take it from you. Now they have something they can use one-on-one, and so the big problem that we've had in the past with a lot of projects is that there's been projects where we didn't do the visual effects, and the design was either they didn't ask for the asset, they didn't see all the different angles, and the director comes back later on and says, it's so weird. It's like, we saw the cool design that you did, and for some reason it looks so different in the movie, and I don't understand why. And a lot of that is just because if a lot of that stuff isn't applied or utilized to the client, for like an asset. So what I end up doing is a lot of times when we sculpt something, we just give it to the production because it's theirs. They basically paid for us to design it, so it's kind of part of that process. If we have to create an asset that's going to be used in production, then that's a different cost, and we spend time and we rebuild it, and that's a different. But generally, I want my design to be as one-to-one as possible, so I'll give them everything. That's including even like when we're doing 2D stuff, the Photoshop files, but that's less helpful because it's not necessarily an asset that can be used. It's more just here's how the illustration may have been created from the scratch, but 3D is very beneficial for 3D visual effects. So designing 3D is kind of our go-to, and it also, as you can see, it's like it really helps illustrate this is obviously going to need a bit more finessing if it's a character on film. It's a good concept for just a basic idea, but it gets everybody like the overall feeling of what that character is going to be, and now they have something they can use. Now our 2D character, now how I saw this, and this is again going back to the original conversation we talked about, was this a character that is going to primarily be a makeup, a prosthetic, and the benefits of that is again dealing with a likeness. So the alien, on the other hand, for our 3D, wasn't a likeness at all. But this may be based on an actor that has been, cast, and you need to make sure that there is some knowing that there's going to be maybe some digital augmentation here and there. You talk about what that digital augmentation, or you're told what that is. May it's the eyes, may it's the mouth, may some other aspect of proportions. But for the most part, it's going to be a lot more work to create this in 3D than it is to just use photographs. I mean, the time frame. Again, I think I go back to fur, hair, all that stuff. 2D is just so much easier right now. One day that will be a little different, and everything will just be easier in 3D. But where we're at right now, and also it's just again dealing with likenesses. Unless you have a scan of the actor, it's this is a good approach for something that is going to be a prosthetic with some digital augmentation. So that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed my presentation and my tutorials on these two methods of designing creatures and characters for film and TV. And I hope it benefits you, and I hope you achieve amazing things in the industry, and I can't wait to see what you achieve and what you create. All right. Have a good one. Take care.